So the earliest forms of religion were religious forms that came out of hunter-gatherer societies. These were nomadic peoples, frequently living in small kinship networks, which means that they were living in groups of about 300 or so. And their primary connection was with the natural world, so their gods reflected that. Their gods were the gods of the animals. As the cave paintings of Dordogne, which is in France, show, the way to appeal to the animal spirit was to depict it on a wall. This was done by, we think, by young men who would enter into a cave and do these drawings either before or after the hunt, either to call on the spirits before hunting them or to thank the spirits after hunting them. But the point was this was a natural-based form of religion. Now, there's a major transition that takes place during a period called the Neolithic Revolution. Now, the Neolithic Revolution is mostly associated in history with what happens in the Tigris and Euphrates River Valley about 7,000 BCE to about 5,000 BCE. And this is a time when people begin to move out of the hunter-gatherer societies, out of the kinship networks, and into villages and cities. This has an enormous implication on the way that people live, the way we live today, settled in homes, close to other people in towns and cities, protected by laws, eating food grown from farms, leisure time. These are all things that come from the Neolithic Revolution. But as far as religion goes, I want you to think about what happens when you have people who are coming from different kinship networks, in other words, different family groups that have to come together to live and also have different totemic animals that they are connected to. That's a fancy way of saying each one of them is worshiping different animals, different groups of spirits, and there is no unity of religious beliefs. So how do you think that's going to impact the religion? Well, I'll tell you. The religion fundamentally begins to change. Large concepts of God begin to emerge in the Neolithic Revolution. By that I mean more human forms of gods begin to come into the picture. And you also have the building of, as you see down here in the bottom image, of things like ziggurats. Now, ziggurat was like a pyramid, and this was where the priest class did all of its religious rituals. It was also the place where wheat was stored. So the place where food was distributed was also the place where God was worshipped, which is interesting. So what you have is people who assume this type of religious position are assumed to have a special spiritual power, a special connection to the gods. They also had connections to food and to money and to resources. So the development of hierarchy, social hierarchy, also developed into hierarchical forms of religious practice. So if you look at early forms of the types of images of sacred images, you see female images. The Venus von Willendorf is a symbol of female fertility. It's round. It has a lot of different elements to it, sometimes associated with menstruation, but certainly the importance of life-giving through the female form. By the time you get into the Neolithic Revolution, that comes out of Sumerian civilization in the Middle East, which was a very aggressive and competitive culture. So those people who were towards the top began to present images of God that effectively represented those who were most powerful. So Gilgamesh, who was the king and a warrior king of Uruk, was sort of a demigod of human strength. You can see his power. This is no longer a symbiotic or balanced relationship with nature. You can see that tiger or lion clawing at his chest. He sort of has power over it. There's a kind of more of a fight between man and nature. And the power of the male figure with the large eyes. So this is also interesting because you begin to get not only emergence of larger sky gods and more male gods, but also ones that involve forms of morality. So the Neolithic Revolution comes before the emergence, for example, of Judaism, which is the first monotheistic religion, which was going to emerge out of this idea of the high God, and the high God being a male God, a God who can see into your morality and can see your actions, which becomes sort of the basis of modern forms of God. So interestingly enough, this form of transition also impacts burial traditions. We begin to see, obviously, in earliest forms of religious practice, people were buried either in open sky graves and were eaten by birds, or were just buried uh, in shallow graves. But here we begin to see people buried in the fetal position. You can think about what that means. You also see people that are buried with physical items, the types of things that they would have had in their lives: gold coins, silver mirrors, forms of social status. So what you begin to see is burial traditions change, images of God change, and so this Neolithic transition is absolutely critical to the change in religion that occurs in that period from about 10,000 BCE to about 2000 BCE, and will be the basis of what we look at in a lot of the religions we look at later in the course.